shoes, right? It did say put on the show.
Did everybody see Glenn's post yet? So he's got out here, it's under the Leadership Light event, and then there's visitor posts underneath there. He took a picture of Ashley and her mom and said, did you know that? Oh, and Cindy posted one too, about the little Jules bus. So that's where you can go, right under our event today, and post stuff up there.
The bus, I saw it coming in.
Yeah.
What is the little Jules bus?
It's another group.
Oh, okay.
They did it under, Glenn posted, I think, under the event.
Oh, shoot, I did the
That's
others.
okay.
Okay.
That's fine. Anywhere is.
Well, awesome. We are very, very happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. I'll start with Namaste and good morning. So my name is Rishi Bayana, and the significance of Namaste is that it salutes the divinity in the other person. And so we are very appreciative that you're here joining us today. I'm also personally very much an admirer of your work. I read about some of the things from the website, the pace, I love that, how that the different things, activities happen within that framework. I think that's really awesome. The revitalization of downtown Bloomington and uptown Normal, I mean, there's a lot of really great things. So we are very happy that we're all here together. I think, and I'm sure this is exactly what you're thinking too, but cross-cultural awareness helps to drive greater community collaboration. So it's an honor to be here to have the privilege to speak on behalf of the Hindu temple. I grew up in town, so I'd share a little background about myself. I was born and raised in Bloomington, Illinois, and I went to the local elementary schools and then University High School and then Illinois Math and Science Academy near Chicago, then University of Illinois. So I looked at my LinkedIn page and it was just plastered with Illinois all over the place. And I love it. I mean, I'm from here, I grew up here, I love what I've learned from my community and love what that's meant to me, and so it's been a big part of my life. I'm taking currently an online leadership course, which has been really interesting. We did a reflection activity to create what's called a personal leadership identity, and I think this single statement, even though it's a little long, it summarizes a little bit about who I am, so I thought this would be useful to share. So it says that driven by my inward nature, love for family and friends, passion for ongoing learning, I use my character and optimism along with presentation and collaboration skills. By the way, I'll let you judge about the presentation skills. And I use all this to inspire others, to share my ideas, and enhance depth of human connection as I learn about the world through my experience. So again, I actually was speaking with my professor from this course, and we talked about this discussion that's happening today, and she said, that's awesome. Religion is one of those vehicles that helps us bring people together to help serve humanity. So it's, again, we're very, very happy that you're here. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I know we have about 45 minutes, and so we'd love to go through a discussion on Hinduism. So I'll go through maybe about 20 minutes of discussion about Hinduism, take us into it, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Anything under the sun that we'd love to talk about. We have several experts in the room as well to help share some of their experiences. And then if we have time towards the end, go towards the Murthis and see the sanctum there. So let's go ahead and get started. Any questions before we start? Yes?
Would you like to apply for the leadership?
Yeah.
We'll talk to you after deadline.
Well, I have time today, so thank you very much. I'll come chat with you afterward. All right, so let's jump into Hinduism. Hinduism itself is a sort of a classification at a single point in time of a much larger longitudinal philosophy of life. And that philosophy is called Sanatana Dharma. And so if we break down these two words, Sanatana means that this exists from the beginning and it never ceases to be. So that could mean before human observation happened here, where we learned about Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma has continued to exist in the past from there. And even if observation ceases to happen someday, it will continue to exist. So that's the meaning of Sanatana. And the meaning of Dharma is that it's a human quest to align with what we consider a universal or cosmic truth. And this is a path of righteousness of how we live, and a path of truth that we try to live so that we can align with such a truth. So let me give an example. In Sanatana Dharma, we believe that there is one single eternal truth that is kind of underlying all the principles of how things unfold. And this eternal truth, as an example, gravity. We know gravity exists. We've observed its velocity. We may not know exactly why it exists at that specific speed. Or you look at water. We know, again, that water may boil at a certain temperature, or it may freeze at a different temperature. Again, these are things we've observed, but there is a greater intelligence phenomenon that's happening that dictates that these specific temperature points are where the water might boil or freeze. And so in Hinduism, or what's called Sanatana Dharma, we are always aiming to get closer and closer and closer to this one single cosmic truth, and trying to align ourselves with how the universe itself unfolds and what those principles might be. So to show just a concept of what it means to traverse that path during a lifetime, you can see kind of this levels of consciousness. And one of the big goals in our practice is to raise ourselves from a lower level of consciousness, from, say, ignorance, to maybe a post-behavior awareness. And from there we can get to in the present moment awareness. But from there we can even get to choice in the matter. And even finally we can get to a place where there's an opportunity for empowerment. So we're getting closer and closer up this chart to get to ultimately that universal truth. And the way we do that is we consider the universe to be our home. And so that means that everything in this universe is what's called Ishvara. Now Ishvara is different manifestations of that single divine energy. So one divine energy, Ishvara might be one thing for one person, or it might be something else for a different person. But we believe that everything is Ishvara, and that means that Hinduism itself is steeped in humanity. So that means respect for other humans, respect for animals, respect for plants, environment, and anything under the sun. Whatever we might relate to as can be considered Ishvara, and that might help us traverse this path over time. In this diagram of the circles here, it helps signify, I won't go into the specific names of what they are, but the idea here is over time we are hoping to reduce this ignorance and try to live more mindfully over time. So the purple you can think of as the ignorance, and the red gets us closer to the core inner truth. So the goal over the path in the Hindu practice is to shed that ignorance and get closer and closer to alignment. So I'd love to use two frameworks to discuss Hinduism today. And the first is called yoga. This is our path to raise our consciousness over time. And the second is called dharma. And these are from our scriptures, things that we've learned about the eternal truth that might help guide our personal or social conduct, so that we can align with that truth. So basically, the hub and spoke model is here because it helps illustrate. The first one, yoga, could be thought of as starting from the outside and going into the inner truth. So maybe I relate to X today, I relate to Y tomorrow, I relate to Z the next day, and I continue to find my way into, as close as I can get into the inner eternal truth. And then the second one is, you can think of almost as inside going out. So these are what realized sages have learned from the scriptures about that eternal truth and given us as things we can practically do day to day to align with it. So those are the two frameworks, but before we get started in talking about them, with yoga, I did want to share this brief 1-minute clip. It talks about yoga, which has several aspects to it. So a few are physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. And this video does a good job of highlighting the different forms of yoga that exist, and I think will help give us a good understanding for the next section.
What is yoga? You might be one of the millions who has taken a yoga class and perhaps even mastered the peacock pose, or maybe the downward dog pose. You might do yoga for physical benefits or to rest your mind, but yoga has a lot more to offer for your deeper consciousness and higher awareness. So what is yoga? Yoga, meaning union, is a Hindu spiritual quest to experience the Brahman, or divine, by balancing our mind. Hinduism recognizes that there are many paths to the divine, and so there are many types of yogas. Besides Hatha Yoga, there are 4 primary yogas. They are Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga.
So that gives a brief kind of introduction into the different forms of yoga. This video was created by a group called Hindu Students, and they've done an awesome job explaining this. The different forms of yoga, this first one, Bhakti, is considered yoga of devotion. So when we're talking about, for example, being here in the temple and worshiping the deities, that might be an element of Bhakti yoga. He also is holding a guitar. That's signifying you can experience devotion through maybe playing music or dancing. If you're very in tune with what you're doing and you're very passionate and driven and dedicated to it, you can find a growth in that fashion. Over here is the example of Karma Yoga, and this is the yoga of service to others, and through external action that you can find a yoga path through there as well. This is called Jnana Yoga, and this is the yoga of wisdom and knowledge. So using that knowledge to shed away any ignorance and to gain greater consciousness. And then this one is Raja Yoga. So this is where the meditation comes in, and stillness, and finding that balance. So the cool thing is with these this framework of using yoga to raise our level of consciousness, even with those 4, there's a ton of diversity in how you might go about it. And with that, I'd love to start talking about yoga with a personal story of mine. So growing up, I was an absolutely avid Chicago Bulls fan. I loved them. I watched every single game for the most part. Even at the next day at school, I remember I could recite almost the full stat line, that Jordan had 6 out of 7 free throws and Pippen had so many assists, and I could just, the whole thing, I just was so in tune with it. I loved it, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I think that with my raising as a Hindu, there were a few principles I took away from my love for the Bulls, and I think a lot of people do take away really great things. The few things I really came away with were the importance of teamwork, collaboration, and leadership. And it showed me how you can get a group together to accomplish a goal that's larger than the individual themselves can do. And this also taught me something that Aristotle has said, that the whole can be greater than the sum of its individual parts. And so these were great principles in teamwork and collaboration that were instilled in me from a very young age. And I think that having this as a form for me was very important. And it's, I kid you not, this is absolutely a perfectly acceptable avenue in Hinduism. And that came as a surprise to me itself, and I was relishing in that fact. And why that's the case is because in Hinduism there is what's called an open architecture. So there is recognition that yoga offers many, many, many paths to the divinity. So if I start to see it through one lens, that's great. If someone else sees it through a different lens, that's great too. We believe that the divine is one single energy, and that Ishvara is many forms or manifestations of that same single energy. So that might result in seeing different deities as being manifestations of that energy, or it might mean that someone might follow it from performing service to community. A very similar example is that of the open online courses that are offered today. It's kind of impact and education, no matter what someone's interested in. they can find an avenue to learn about that so that they can gain greater knowledge. And what the massive open online courses are doing is offering an avenue to help those folks accomplish the same thing. So it's very much a similar open architecture. And I also read on the website too at McLean County Chamber of Commerce, I think it's the Online Learning Center. So that's great. I mean, it's whatever stage a business is in, whether they are first establishing, or they want to get deeper into accounting, or they want to figure out growth strategies. All of those things are offered through the venue of open online learning. And so it's kind of an open architecture and a similar concept in Hinduism. Whatever manifestation of this divine energy that someone can relate to is perfectly acceptable to get closer and closer to that ultimate truth. And to give a further example, when we go to the sanctum a little bit later, there are a diversity of deities that you'll see there. And this core dharmic practice, so this core belief that there's a one single eternal truth and that it has lasted forever and it will last forever, there have been different branches, or you could consider offshoots of that. So at one point in time, we have, there has been Hinduism, or there has been Buddhism, or Jainism, or Sikhism, and these are just a few of the many, many, many branches or offshoots of this core dharmic belief. And so these were created to help connect to different people at different stages in time, maybe what was relevant to certain groups of people. This was founded around certain principles that helped connect those people with and closer to that eternal truth. I think the cool thing I'd love to illustrate here is that these all coexisted very peacefully. Everyone was, in the dharmic practice, everyone was very open and accepting, and there's a huge spirit of acceptance that's embedded in this open architecture. So for example, of the deities that are shown here, and we'll see many of the murtis over in the sanctum, I pray every day to Lord Ganesha, the form in the elephant form here on the left. And there are a few symbolic features of Lord Ganesha that I particularly, based on my inclination at the time, or based on my stage of life, or maybe even based on someone's geographic region where they're from in India, it might drive them to a certain deity. But for me, with Lord Ganesha, there are a few things. Lord Ganesha is known as the remover of obstacles. So whatever you're trying to accomplish, that he can help remove the obstacles and continue along the path. He also has very large ears, and that signifies symbolically the importance of listening. He also has a very large sized head, and there symbolizes the importance of knowledge and wisdom. And another funny thing is he has his vehicle a very small mouse, and that signifies the respect of all forms of life. So even as an elephant, to ride a small mouse as a vehicle, have respect and harmony with all forms of life. A few other key beliefs I'll touch on very briefly are this overall, throughout a single life form, these are a couple key beliefs of Hinduism. We believe that a cycle of life goes through, can go through death and rebirth and go through different forms. So in one cycle of death and rebirth, it might be the case that some karmic action, external action takes place so that something that might have been done positively in a previous life form may end up paying off positively in this life form. And that might indicate why someone might be creatively brilliant, or very inclined in sports, or a business strategist. But this karma, or conservation of energy, is similar in concept to, you reap what you sow, and what goes around comes around, and this, I think, funny image shows that pretty nicely. But it doesn't have to be bad. It can be absolutely a good thing. So again, if in this life form you may have particular inclinations, it may be because of some positive karma that was performed, like service to humanity in a previous life form. And through this cycle of the different forms and the death and rebirth that happens, the goal over time is to achieve moksha and achieve liberation from the ignorance. So again, we're trying to shed that ignorance over time and gain greater ability to realize that eternal truth. And it just happens to be that in the human form we have probably the greatest capability to traverse that path more and more because of how we can be self-aware and how we can find the Ishvara and kind of get closer and closer. So that covers the section on yoga. And I think this statement summarizes it very nicely. The truth is one, sages call it by different names. And so this was from one of our scriptures of Rig Veda. And the goal here overall is to achieve universal harmony. And the way we do it is by learning a little bit from our scriptures, what it has taught us about personal conduct and social conduct. So the second framework we're going to use, going from the inside going out, is called Dharma. So there are a couple key things that help us understand what our personal conduct should be or might be, what our duty should be at the given time. And one of the first things is the 4 ashrama, or these are the stages of life that we go through. And if we look at it, that we're born and we grow into a young adult, and from there we start to go into from a dependent state to an independent state. And then we might, get married, build a household life, build the family life, and then give contributions to the community, then onward to give contributions to the nation. And then we, through the contributions, maybe we'll reach the stage of retired life, and then we can focus on from the nation to humanity, and in the older age to a renounced life. So going from humanity to the universe to the truth. So this lens helps us understand what our personal conduct should be at a given moment in time, because it helps us understand what stage of life we're in. And this helps to explain why there is a large diversity in the Hindu population of how someone might practice certain personal conduct at different points in time. But this isn't all of it. The important part of what drives personal conduct is called dharma. So dharma, to define it, is the principle that guides how we conduct our lives. And there are 4 core principles that are absolutely key and absolutely essential. You can think of it as a covenant, that if we are performing dharma, then we have to agree with these 4. So this entails that there's moral and ethical behavior at every single level, and no exception there. 2, it's about perfection. 3, it's the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and to always be on the side of right. And then 4, it's the focus on universal harmony. So these 4 core principles are absolutely essential. And to give an example of what dharma means, we have an image of surgeons that are collaborating around a patient. The very same knife that a surgeon uses to cut out cancer from a patient and help save their lives could be the same knife that a thief uses to perform a robbery or something like that. And the example of the surgeon is when they are following the path of right living, they are following the path of righteousness, they are doing dharma, they are conducting their lives in a way that does align with the universe. But the example of the thief is an example where they're going against the path of the universe. And so that's what's considered adharma. So the dharma, and this might again give insight into how there are in the Hindu population, how many different diversity of practices there might be. Everybody who does practice their dharma subscribes to these 4 core principles. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. But the specific thing they do or how they carry that out, whether it's service to humanity, or it's becoming a physician, or it's teaching, whatever it might be, that diversity is explained by they're being able to follow their inclination on their own life path. Yes, please.
Couple of questions. So
Yeah.
one about moral and ethical.
Yes.
That's a lot of interpretations of that.
Yeah.
And then second of all, perfection, that's a pretty big word. So what, can you explain a little more what's meant by perfection?
Yeah, it's
What's perfect look like, or what's the concept there?
It's a great question. I think and I will also invite some of our experts in the room to also add on to it. But I think when I apply it to myself, so I think I have my own moral and ethical compass based on what I've learned growing up and based on what I've seen and how I understand the world. And so when I try to define at any given moment in time, even in difficult circumstances, what's right or what's wrong, I actually take a lot of time to reflect. So it might even go back to the Raja Yoga, that I sit down or maybe meditate or still the mind to really understand principally what's happening, and or I might bounce it off other people to get full understanding. And actually, in the leadership class I'm taking, there have been a couple frameworks that have been offered to help understand what is seen as moral or ethical in any given context. So, what effects can an action have on others, such that you can maximize the benefit to others and minimize any hurt. So, I think it's there in the scriptures is probably a profound understanding. But the folks that can have access to that are the realized ones, the sages who can really find themselves aligned with that truth, who have really shed that ignorance. But for me, what I can do in my time is to try, in different ways, try to find what the right answer is. But this core principle tells me I obviously need to act ethically and morally at every single level: individual, organization, community, nation, and I can try and use everything I can, especially with the community that we have in town, to learn how and what is the right action to take. So that's how I think about it in my way. And then perfection is a great one. It's a big one. So this one, I think as well, it's been something I'm learning myself. Like I think that there's an art to doing something with beautiful intent and with focus to accomplish the goal and to achieve what it is. And I try to conduct my life in a way that maximizes that. But I think for me, it's definitely a learning in process.
Yeah, I've liked the phrase about perfect effort, more important than perfect results, because perfection can put a lot of stress on people to think, but as long as you're striving for the proper end, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what
like
hits
that.
me when I see perfection. You're trying to act or do your best.
I like that line a lot. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna write that down.
It's the process that counts, right? The process is the journey. Process is a journey as well as the goal. So
Excellent questions.
And the moral and ethical sounds a little self-guided, a little intuition overall. Christianity has the 10 Commandments that are right out there and explicit, and then obviously there are several others throughout the scriptures that relate to that. But it sounds like kind of trust your own self-judgment from what you've learned and experienced and those around you, and then just try to follow what you think is, make right choices according to whatever that compass is. That's what it's getting at there.
Yeah, and so I will clarify, that is at least my understanding in my stage in life, and what I would love to invite to speak.
That is true, actually, because from different religious contexts, what is moral and what is ethical is defined by the scriptures that are given to that populace. And what dharma is more the core principles that hold those together. Because obviously, if one is in conflict with another, what do? Kind of is the dilemma that comes in all of our lives, almost in every instance where we have to make a decision. So this gives a much more broader understanding of the base in which everything is stood, so that we don't lose track of the base. in which everything is laid out. So at that point of time, it is a choice that is made. So I think that is when he gives a perfect example as to handling a knife might be a common thing, but what does it mean from the context of a surgeon versus a thief kind of a thing.
Right.
So that is how it fits into the context.
Excellent. So a few examples of Dharma might be that we learn something new every day. So the big thing in Dharma is to continue moving forward, not to stop and not to be stationary, but to keep going, to keep getting closer and closer. And another one is to protect the environment, and that it in return will take care of us. Another example is the work that you do with the businesses in the community and help them thrive and help bring a positive cultural or positive environment to the area to help facilitate the growth. And what one of our scriptures says, the Bhagavad Gita says that it is better to live your own dharma than to live an imitation of somebody else's life. And this was stated in a very similar way by the late Steve Jobs. He shared this at a graduation speech. Your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. So this guides a lot of our personal conduct, but I'll also touch on what guides some of our social conduct. And in that, if someone follows their dharma, so again, if we're going down the path of, say, the surgeon as the example, they would fall into one of these four varna. And so you can see common skills that are associated with these different four varna, but any given person might have a mix of all four of these, but they would have one predominant varna. So it might be intellectual, as is the case with the Brahmins, or it might be with the Shudras, hands-on workers. And the big thing I want to illustrate here is that in the Hindu scriptures and in the culture, we think of all four of these as powerhouses. And on top of that, we think of all four of these as equals. And a way that I would like to look back to the earlier example to illustrate it is with the Chicago Bulls. On this team, we had folks who were the intellectual, the coaches, the leadership on the team. We had the defenders, the protectors of the rim, who maybe played best defense. We had the business folks, the strategy, the team that maybe even brought this group of individuals together to create a team that's really great. And we had the role players, so some of the players who hit the three-point shots that defined the fact that they won the game. Each one of them played a role, and it helped me understand in a social conduct, how does a group of individuals work together to optimize their effectiveness and to work together to contribute to humanity. And a few ways to find that varna. So in Hinduism, we believe in paying attention to our guna, which is our inherent nature, and that will help us reveal or understand that signature strength. But there are so many ways that I myself have used. Take, for example, the Myers-Briggs personality test, StrengthsFinder book, to help discover what my strengths are and what I can understand about what is my predominant signature strength. So that covers a little bit about what our social conduct looks like. And before we turn it over to questions, I thought I'd touch briefly on the Hindu temple's mission. Just to give a very quick synopsis, the goal in the mission is to meet the religious, spiritual, and cultural needs of the Hindu community, preserve the Hindu way of life, and promote ancient Hindu Vedic philosophy. And the way that the temple achieves this mission is through the 4 types of yoga. So again, those 4 types include, there we go. The karma yoga, so yoga of service, yoga of devotion, yoga of knowledge, and yoga of meditation. And all 4 of these bring about, in the community, greater alignment to that universal truth. And these are a few of the temple activities that take place in all 4 of these realms to help support that process. So before we go over to questions, I thought I'd end on this very beautiful, profound quote from Mark Twain. He stated that India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. So with that, I thank you very much for joining us, and really appreciate that we get to have this conversation. And with that, I'd love to turn it into our Q&A time. Yes?
Go ahead. Oh, you mentioned the scriptures several times. Yes. Where do the scriptures come from? What is the source?
It's actually really cool. So over time, the scriptures have been shared via what's called Shruti. And that means it was shared orally. So it was people would listen to the scripture, and that carried the most profound kind of untouched version of the scripture of the truth. And then at different points in time, there were writings down on the paper, and that's called smriti. And so while it may not have been as perfect a translation of the scripture, it was still something that was written down into form at different points in time to help illustrate the principles of that eternal truth and to help people relate to it and follow it.
Is there a name for that book, or is it a book or a collection, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think overall it's called Shruti, but there are several books. One very common example is the Bhagavad Gita. That's one that many do follow or read quite a bit, and friends of mine in our community have read it and have the book at home. And so there's Bhagavad Gita, there's another one called Ramayana. There are several at different stages or different points in time that were created where they sat down and wrote what it meant at that particular time. But overall, the heading is Shruti, or Smriti. Shruti and Smriti. Perfect.
Yeah. Go back to that, you had quoted the Bhagavad Gita
Yeah.
in one of them, just for those who are interested how that's spelled, in case you want to.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah.
My question was the same, actually.
Really?
Yes. So with it, I guess I can expound upon that question because you answered, you've answered part of it. So
Yeah.
just so I'm clear in my head, I have a Christian background, so that's my frame of reference.
Yes.
So as I'm thinking about our scriptures and how they come from sort of one body,
Mhm.
right, in maybe one time period-ish, it sounds like there's not a person, it's more of the truth, and it gets cascaded through people's realization of it versus one person speaking it. Is that?
That was awesome. I'd
Accurate?
love for you to
Okay.
give this person. You're exactly right. So, exactly. The divine truth is there, that divine energy exists, and then it manifests in different forms.
Okay.
And so the realized sages kind of have come close to understanding that form, and we've shared in the scriptures kind of that process. So yeah, that is spot on.
Thank you. This has been really insightful. Thanks so much.
I'm really glad to hear it. Excellent. Yeah.
So this is the temple in Bloomington, Normal, or McLean County area. Is there a structure? Like Catholic has, the Vatican, and then on down, Jewish has different, how's the structure work, or a church, or, you've mentioned sages a handful of times.
Yeah. That's a great question.
It's
Yeah.
not like an organized Catholic kind of setup.
Right.
It's more a freelance kind of setup, like other Christian faiths that have the same setup within the same umbrella. So it's not as though like every temple is associated with a bigger temple, and then there is. But there are like a small association kind of setups within the Hindu religion as such. But in a broader sense, the temples are not like associated with each other or anything. Like it's just a place where all Hindus get together for their needs in that community.
Does your temple interact with other temples? Do you have any?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. In fact, we took a lot of help to be able to build this from one temple.
Sure. Thank you.
And then my second question was going to
Yes.
be, you mentioned Buddhism
Yes.
as one branch, and in my mind coming in, I had always thought Buddhist was its own religion, Hindu was its own religion, so
Yeah.
can you give like kind of just a little bit of, we saw how they're the same, but what are some of the differences, or what
Absolutely. So Buddhism is one that focuses a lot on the inner self. And so this form of maybe of the yoga, I think this framework of looking at the yoga might help explain a little bit. But Buddhism is very large in the meditation and the meditative state and the inner growth, and using that as the avenue to achieve the realizing the truth. So while Buddhism does a lot of its focus here, Hinduism might focus a little bit more on the devotion to whether it's, as that person was playing the guitar earlier, or it's to a deity and to devoting themselves to that. But that maybe gives a little bit.
Where, if, to add on to what Rishi said, obviously, the question comes, so like, can we take every religion and then put it within this framework? Or like, how does Buddhism, even though it is a separate religion, kind of like fits into this framework? The answer for that is, all like Buddhism or Jainism or Sikhism or any of these other branches that we would, it's a loose term, but have a common goal of investigating the dharma. So they all agree on the dharmic principles that were stated earlier. So that is what becomes the foundation for all these. And then when they explore it further, there would be points that each one does not agree on. But the foundation would be the same.
So the paths are many, but the goal is the same. And Buddha was born in India. That's where he realized and he achieved his liberation. So he comes from India, and that's why Buddhism is part of the practice. That's but it spread to many parts of the many countries because of his teachings. Everybody related to that.
Excellent. I'd love to be respectful of the time. We're at the 45 mark, and I'd love to maybe if we have a minute to see the sanctum. But thank you so very much for the opportunity to talk and have the conversation, and it was really great to meet you, and we'll continue to chat.
Thank you.